The Dixon Public Library's Oral History Project. Today I'm talking with Lena Yolo. My name is Paul Ferrell, and we're here at the Dixon Library. And let's see, today is July 28th, 1998. Of course, we're going to talk about Dixon, but first, some family history. What family history do you know? You know much?
Family history?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my father and mother, Peter, my father, Peter, came in 1889 from Switzerland. It seems that there was a famine-like and very poor conditions, and the young men couldn't find work, so they decided they'd come to America, and especially California. And when I was in Switzerland, right in the town where he came from is a monument erected to those young people that came to California, left Switzerland, came to California. And he was here, and then he knew my mother before he left Switzerland and all, but of course I had never courted or anything, so he started writing letters to her, and then persuaded her to come. So his sister came with her, and I can't imagine anybody leaving Switzerland without any knowledge of English, and going through all the channels, leaving the boat at Havre, France, and coming to United States, and going through Ellis Island and all that, and boarding a train and coming to California.
And those were two sisters doing that.
Yes, and he met her in San Francisco, and they were married in San Francisco at St. Peter and Paul Church, and then later brought her to Suisun on Joyce Island, near. And she couldn't get over having to come in there by boat to her new home and all. But my oldest brother was born in 1904. Then I had a sister born in 1906. And then I was born in 1907 there in Suisun. And then some of his friends had come in the neighborhood of Dixon, so he thought maybe it was a good time for him to come up. And so he did. He found this place, which we call the home place. It's on Meridian Road, and right near the Highway 40, and there my youngest brother was born in 1912. So there were four of us children, and grew up in the house without electricity. We had lamps. It was always our job to clean the lamps, the lampshades, and fill them with kerosene and all. And
Now your father, he came from Switzerland. Was that the French-speaking part?
No, the Swiss Italian, the Italian part.
And what was his livelihood? He was a farmer, or what did he do?
What?
Well, what sort of work did he do when he got to California?
Oh, he worked for a laborer. And I remember he worked in St. Helena for the Salmina winery, and just a laborer, you know, really, working on the farms.
Now, when you were born, your father owned a farm then, or?
Well, they tell me I was 6 or 7 months old when we came to the ranch where we lived.
Oh, that's right. You were born in Sassoon.
I was born in Sassoon. Well, that's what the name of the closest city. But
now, the home place you mentioned, was that farming or dairy or sheep, or what did they do out here?
no, there was a dairy.
Dairy?
Dairy, oh yes, and no equipment or anything, and then milked. We called it the corral. We milked out in the corral, and brought in the milk, and it ran through the separator, and it separated the milk from the cream, and then the cream was shipped to San Francisco.
Was that shipped by train or?
Yeah, he brought it mostly to Dixon, and it was shipped by train to San Francisco, and it gradually grew and so forth. And then when my oldest brother, helped my father, and also my younger brother did. At first it was Peter Yolo and Sons Dairy, and then it was Yolo Brothers, because father kind of dropped out of it, and the two boys went on, and then my oldest brother was killed or died, and then it became John V. Yolo Dairy, and eventually it became, with my father's advice and his wanting to improve the dairy, it became the first grade A dairy in Solano County. And we shipped our milk, or took the milk, into the Vaca Valley Creamery. And that was in 1937, I think it was.
Now, you said you, as a little girl, you remember cleaning the kerosene lamps. Everybody tells me dairy farming is so much work.
Oh, yes. Yes, we had lamps, and the heat was only a wood stove, a kitchen cook stove, wood stove, and we walked to the country school, except when it was raining, and then our father would take us in a cart.
Which school did you go to?
We went to Owen School.
Owen School.
Owen, It was a country school. And graduated from Owen, and then came to Dixon High School, because that area was in the Dixon High School district. And it took a little while for the country pupils that came in, because the class was composed mainly of the pupils that graduated from Vacaville, from Dixon Grammar School, you see. And they all knew each other and all that. And so we were kind of like the outsiders that had come in.
Were there very many of you from Owen School?
Well, just my sister and I. Oh, and two others. One was a senior and one was a sophomore. And they lived near us. And my father persuaded, they had a car, and he persuaded them to come 1 mile to the corner to pick us up and then come on Highway 40. See, it was not Interstate 80 then, it was Highway 40. And so we came into high school with them. And then after they graduated, my father got a car, a Star. And you remember a Star
Never
automobile?
heard of a Star.
Well, anyway, then we learned to drive, and then we came into high school for the last year. And then I went on to San Francisco State and graduated. I taught 1 year out in the country in Suisun Valley, and then came to Vacaville and taught there for 41 years.
Well, let's go way back to the Owen School. What was that like? Was it a real small school with just one teacher, or
Well,
how would you describe it?
I really had some pictures. I didn't bring any of the pictures, but let me see, maybe 20, 25 students from the area around. Students, there were, let's see, 4 graduated with us from grammar school, but 1 went on, didn't come to high school, and the other one went to Woodland. So my sister and I were the only ones that came that year, 1920, when we graduated from grammar school.
Well, how did grammar school work? Did you have all different ages of kids together?
Oh, all ages.
All ages in one
All
classroom?
ages, oh yes. 1st grade up through 8th.
Together in the same classroom?
Same room.
And one school teacher had to
One
take
teacher
control.
handled all of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is. What a difference. What a difference. Even when I taught, I didn't have all the help that the teachers have nowadays with parents in the room and different department heads coming in and helping. But
Well, now, high school, you mentioned that you were from a country school and the other kids were from the Dixon Grammar School. Were kids treated differently if they're from the city or if they're from the country?
well, I think there was a little feeling that, you know, you weren't in the group, you know, and I can see where it did make a difference.
Well, what was high school like? I always hear about Dixon was good in sports. Dixon High School had some good
Oh.
sports.
Oh yeah, well,
Did you know some of those Royer boys who played baseball?
Oh, yes. Otto's class really had quite a few athletes in it, and we were never able to go to any of the games or anything because we had to go home and work. We had to go milk those cows and all. But there was rivalry between Dixon and Vacaville, and oh dear, you know how it went on. And then, of course, when I was teaching in Vacaville, I couldn't carry on any more favoritism to Dixon or one or the other, because Vacaville was very, very good to me.
Now Vacaville, I guess that was the big rival in sports then, the baseball and
yes.
all.
And Vacaville, but Dixon had some good athletes at the time. Yeah.
Well, what did you do for fun, for recreation, if you ever had any time off from school and from working on the dairy?
Well, we made our own fun. We had stilts. We had baseball, which we all liked. Played Won-A-Cat, I think that's the name, isn't it? Won-A-Cat baseball.
Never heard of it.
Well, there's a pitcher and a catcher, and a ball of string was our ball. Yes. Fixed it and wound it up real tight and all. Well, we didn't have anything else, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And grammar school, it was always a good game of baseball at recess, and we would play ante-over, throw the ball over the schoolhouse, and then caught the ball, and we'd run around and try to tag people on the other side. Did you ever play that game?
No, never played that one.
Ante-over or something, and teacher was the janitor. She washed the windows and took care of all. We had outside privies, toilets outside, one for the girls and one for the boys. And then, of course, as time went on, the schools became unified, you know. The rural schools that belonged to Dixon, in the Dixon district, were unified with Dixon. And then the same thing happened in Vacaville. All those rural schools that were outlying were all unified, and then, of course, buses came in, you know, for transportation and all.
Well, speaking of transportation, you mentioned a car called a Star. Well, what were the earliest cars like? And I guess the roads weren't very good, were they?
Well, it was just a touring car. And we had to put on, in the rain, we had to put on those curtains, you know.
So there wasn't windows then?
On the window, yes. They were black, well, I would say, it was a material that would shed the water.
Uh-huh.
And then the isinglass. Wasn't that what you call isinglass? Windows in it,
Uh-huh.
so you could see space, so you could see out.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, mm, my father was very friendly with a man by the name of D'Artney that had a machine shop here in Dixon, and he was the dealer for the Star and for the Durant, and so my father felt loyal to him and purchased those cars from him. And then we did get a Ford, I think in 1917, Ford pickup.
Now the roads, did the cars get stuck out on the roads and have to have horses to pull them out?
If the cars got stuck, what?
When the cars, did they get stuck on the road a lot?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. The roads weren't paved, They were all either gravel or just plain dirt, difficult traveling. And pretty muddy in the wintertime.
Okay.
Yes.
What about electricity? You said you had kerosene lamps to begin with. Did you? You must have eventually got electricity out there then.
Yes. Must have come. Well, I don't know. I can't say. Maybe 1915, 1917.
Mm-hmm. So,
and of course it was, just a drop light from the ceiling. There were no fixtures or...
Mm-hmm.
But at that time we thought that was pretty wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And what about, the telephone? That must have been later then. Did you get a telephone out there?
Yes, we had a telephone. It was a Dixon. It was a Dixon telephone, and we had different rings. One long and two short was our ring, and we could call the neighbors when the phone was working, but sometimes it was not working.
So that's what they call a party line. You have certain rings, and your neighbor has other rings.
Yeah.
Someone told me that neighbors would listen in on the neighbor's conversation.
Oh, yes. Everybody knew. And then eventually Vacaville wanted to come out with the telephone, and of course that made it a lot better. Yeah, than the farmer's line. I think it was called a farmer's line. When the farmers kept it up.
Oh, they did the work on it.
They did the work on it, yes. And they would find, if something went wrong, they would find the trouble and fix it.
Did they do the same for the roads? Farmers fix their own roads?
Yeah, practically.
Yeah? Well, now let's see. You said you were born in 1907. That means you were 10 years old with World War I. Do you remember much about how that affected Dixon back then?
Well, it really didn't affect our family because we had no one of age to go to war. But that didn't affect us as much as World War II.
Mm-hmm. Did you have some brothers go there?
That was pretty hard because labor was hard to get. Yeah, and help was hard to get, and prices.
I heard about going back to the First War. Towards the end of the war, there was that Spanish flu epidemic. Did that affect Dixon?
Well, it didn't affect us, but my mother's sister, who was a teacher in Switzerland, died from it, and of course it affected her a great deal. But really, it didn't affect anyone in the family. And I remember it didn't affect any of the people we knew, really, except that one instance where my aunt died.
In Switzerland. Well, I think right after the war, I think in 1920, that's when Prohibition began. Now, your family is Swiss Italian. Did they make wine? Did they have to stop making wine?
Oh. Yes. We had a little vineyard, and my father planted the grapes that he thought would make the good wine. So for a while, he used the grapes from that and made wine, and crushed it and all. And he was a pretty good winemaker. And then kind of lost interest, and nobody really drank that much wine and all, so gave it up and removed the vineyard, and he put in more alfalfa to raise hay for the cows. And oh yes, anyone came, he would always treat them to wine, and very often put out a light lunch for them if they came from a distance.
Well, you know, I should stop this and turn it over just a second. Okay, we got that going. Well, let's see. Now, what about the 1930s with the Depression? Did that change things for the dairy farm and change things for Dixon? Well, You know, the Depression, people have told me that farmers were self-sufficient, so they had enough to get by. Was that true out where you lived?
Well, as far as my family was concerned, it's true, because I think we bought another ranch during the Depression. Bought another ranch. An old-timer by the name of Mr. Udell had an acreage about 3 miles from home, and he was a good friend of my father's, and he said, Peter, he says, I'd like you to have the ranch. And I think we bought the ranch for $3,000. Which is it's still in the family. And he used to raise watermelons on it. And with a horse and wagon, he would sell the watermelon. Believe it or not, it had no irrigation at that time. And he would stop at our home and give us watermelons. Of course, that was a treat for us. Really, I can't say that. And of course, we always had a garden and fruit at home. So I can't say that the Depression really hurt us.
You know, we've been talking a lot about farms and ranches, but what about the town of Dixon and the businesses? What businesses do you remember when you were a little girl?
Well, let me see. I remember Schulze's store.
I heard about Schulze's. He had everything, didn't he?
Yes, and one of the courses that we had to take in high school was sewing, and we went there for all our supplies. I remember buying the material called nainsook.
What's that?
Well, it's just plain white cloth. And we went there. People don't know what nainsook is nowadays. Never heard of it. But that was one of the projects in our sewing class. And hosiery or wearing apparel, well, you went to Schulze's store.
Now, Dixon had a theater Dixon doesn't have a theater today, but it had a theater back in the 20s. Did they have the theater, or earlier?
Well, I think the first theater was over on where the post office is now. Somewhere in there. And I really think the first movie I ever saw was in the Dixon Theater. Long time. I really don't remember how old I was. And Did anybody mention Duke's grocery store?
No, I've never heard of Duke's Grocery.
Duke's grocery store. He had, I think it was Duke's. I could be wrong. And that was on Main Street.
Now you mentioned, I forgot what you said, but your father bought his star from a
Mr. DeArtney?
DeArtney. He sold cars, or was he a...
Yes.
There must have been some, I guess, mechanics in town.
Well, he was a mechanic, and he fixed machinery, and I don't know whether I'd call him a blacksmith or not, but he did. That was up on North First Street. No one's mentioned him?
I think you're the first to mention him. I know the Carpenters had kind of a blacksmith shop and an undertaking as well. Strange combination. Now the post office, now that was a place to go to when you came into town, right?
Yes. Our post office was Dixon when we first came
So is
to
that
the area.
was that kind of a weekly trip or something to pick up your mail?
Oh, yes. My father would come. Well, he banked here in Dixon. Bank of America. That was the Bank of Dixon. And Dr. Hall was president, I think of it. Dr. Hall was a physician here in Dixon. He was our family physician. I broke my arm when I was about 6 years old, and my father took me into Dr. Hall. Then we'd have to go back for visits. Good old doctor. He would pull out a drawer and give me a chocolate candy.
How did a 6-year-old break her arm?
Well, I fell out of a fig tree.
Oh.
Climbing trees.
That happens.
Right near the house.
So you like the doctor? Because of the candy, huh?
Oh, yes, yes.
What about other business? What about hotels? Dixon, I guess you never stayed in a hotel in Dixon, but Dixon did have a couple, didn't it?
No, I don't know anything about the hotel.
I guess you would.
Dixon.
What is something you said? You said that the girls all took a sewing class in school. Of course, no boys ever took sewing. That was girls. What were
No.
the boys? What were they doing?
Well, the boys didn't even take the cooking class. My sister,
Cooking class.
my sister took sewing and the cooking class. And of course, she became a very good homemaker. She could do anything in the line of cooking and the line of gardening and the line of housekeeping. Miss Hooper was our teacher.
Now, when the girls were taking sewing and cooking, what were the boys taking as classes?
Well,
What did your brother take?
my oldest brother didn't go to high school, but my youngest brother did. And of course, he went to Vacaville High because there was a bus, such as it was, that Vacaville sent out and he could ride the bus. So he went to Vacaville High. 'Cause we were on the borderline between Vacaville and Dixon, you see. Well, boys took manual training.
What's that?
They well, they made things, wooden things, stools, breadboards, cutting boards. You know, it was woodwork, and it was called manual training. No one's mentioned that?
No. Well, come to think of it, somebody did. Somebody told me about some metal hinges they made. Who was that? I think Vernon Dutra said in high school he made these metal hinges. Oh, that's right. And Arnold Collier showed me what do you call it? Kind of a lift for lifting up your car. He made that at school. So I guess
Well,
training is school was a little more practical back then.
yeah, well, yeah, I remember that. And then they took classes, geometry and algebra and things that would prepare them for college.
Well, now, something everybody mentions, and maybe you should tell me a little bit about, is the May Day celebration. Later they called it Mayfair. I guess that's a big Dixon event.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think everybody looked forward to May Day then, and our May Queen was always someone from the senior class. And I sort of forgotten about her attendance, unless seems to me like someone was selected from the different towns to be her attendant, like Lea Vista, Vacaville, Dixon.
So the Queen had attendance.
The Queen's attendant, but always, someone from the senior class would be the May Queen, and that was fine. And I remember a maypole dance that they would have on May Day. Lovely. I think it was out here, held out in the north of in that park, and they would have a pole with the streamers, and the children would dance the maypole. Really. Oh.
I think I've seen pictures of that. They all hold ribbon or string or something, and how does it work?
And then well, there was a little knack. It would wind. Some of the players would go one way and the others would go the other way, and eventually the pole got wrapped with the ribbons. Have you ever seen a maypole?
I've seen just pictures of it. I've never seen that happen. That comes from Europe. That's a European tradition.
Well,
I
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
But I always loved the maypole, and when I taught, I would always have a maypole in the spring. Children soon learned that they had to go one way and the others the other way, and in and out.
Well,
And
the other.
then we had horse racing then too at Maple and May Day.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and of course, most of the time I think we came for the parade and and to watch the Maple. Yeah, but
Somebody told me, they mentioned the horses, but there was usually a baseball game as well.
yeah, I think they had baseball games too, and then of course they had baseball games like on Sunday, not May Day, but on Sundays with the different teams from the nearby towns.
And always the Royer boys were the heroes?
Oh yeah. Well, we watched the Royer boys when they played with the Pacific Coast League, Sacramento.
The Solons? Yeah.
Yeah, and Portland, didn't one of them play Portland?
I don't know. I know one of them went back east and played Pittsburgh, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those four Royer
So
boys.
we were always anxious to watch them on radio and hear them hear the games on radio, you know.
Well, what about radio? Now, radio was a real form of entertainment, I guess.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So that was
Amos and Andy.
Amos and
Oh,
Andy.
my father wouldn't miss Amos and Andy.
I always liked Jack Benny. I've heard Jack Benny.
But
I always liked Jack Benny.
yeah.
I've
Oh
heard
yeah.
the old Jack Benny program. Well, there's another parade. Started a little bit later, the Portuguese and their Holy Ghost parade. Did you come into town to watch that?
Yes. Yes, and I think we were in the parade once. My sister and I.
I talked to the first queen. That was May Azevedo. She was the first queen of that.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, you know, everybody I talk to, they're always talking about the Germans and they're talking about the Portuguese. Now, what about the Swiss Italians?
Well, the Dodini family. You remember? Did anyone ever mention Dodini?
No,
On West A, and that beautiful two-story house is still out there. It's sort of a landmark, and it was built by the Dodini son-in-law, Louis de Damy, because he married one of the Dodini girls, and they had a large dairy, and my uncle worked for them, I know, and then one of the granddaughters lives here in Dixon. Gosh, her name is, I should know her name now. And then my father, then I know we came, then my father persuaded his brother-in-law, the Baccherinis, to come to Dixon, and they bought the Cagle place. Cagle was an old-time name in Dixon, and they bought the Cagle place. So it was, they had two boys and a girl, Philip and Romeo and Rose, and they were the ones that would come and play baseball with us, and we'd go to their place. And then the Pietzis, Barbara, grandfather and grandmother lived out north of Dixon, and then Barbara Beckworth, her grandfather and grandmother.
Now,
she lives here in Dixon, you know. And then out on Meridian Road too, we had family of Garibaldi and Ponzini. They were in-laws together, and they bought a ranch out there and had dairy and so forth. And then a family by the name of Buzzini came to live there, and then the Panizas came to live there, and they're still there. And then who else? Oh, Truffini. Truffini was a Swiss family that settled in Dixon, and they lived down on East A Street. And Joe, one of the sons, was quite prominent in high school, and he was quite athletic too, and played baseball and all. And, so there are quite a few that have lived around Dixon.
now these families you mentioned, well, I talk to other people and they just say, well, they're Italian. But to be more correct, they're Swiss Italian.
Well, I'd say Swiss Italian. Yeah.
And of course, well, that part of Switzerland is dairy is a big industry. So did they?
Yes.
They kind of came into dairy here.
Yeah. Yes. They. Well, if they had more than one cow, they were rich. I remember Mother talking about taking the cows different places so they could pasture, and then they would make the butter and take it to Locarno, which is one of their big towns, to sell at the market and so forth. I think of them crossing some of those mountains, really, to get to market on foot. You know, they had no transportation then. I went to Switzerland in 1970, and I could see progress. I could see people well off and all that, and I said, I can't understand why my father left Switzerland and all. And they said, oh, but it was pretty awful then, you know. But of course, progress. It really is a beautiful country, and all of my people that are there now are doing real well.
Well, I know we're supposed to just talk about Dixon, but just you did mention you found some old family back in Switzerland.
Did I what?
Did you find old family back in Dixon?
Oh yeah,
in,
yeah,
Switzerland?
yeah.
Well, we better talk about Dixon. You know, I think we've gone down the list of things to talk about, and we talked about them all. Is there anything else you want to say? Something maybe we forgot to talk about Dixon? Any of your favorite things?
You're always going to think of something that you haven't talked about. You're always going to, but
that always happens. You're right.
I think we touched on
Yeah.
maybe things that other people haven't talked to you about,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a classmate in Dixon, Elsie Hamill, and of course she's not very well, I don't think. I think the last I heard she was in a rest home in Davis, but she was an old timer in Dixon, and she could tell you, up until recently, I know, and I think she still has a real good memory. She's a relative of Otto Royer, kind of a cousin, I think. She was one of the descendants of the Germans that came to Dixon.
Well, I'll check and see if she's on my list, but right now I have to put a new tape on. Just a second, okay? Okay, I put a new tape in the recorder. Yeah, we're gonna talk to a lot of people who have memories of Dixon. Everybody's got a different angle, a different story.
Yeah.
Well, what else should we talk about, or are we done?
I thought we were about finished.
Yeah, I guess we are. Okay, well, Lena, I want to thank you for stopping by and taking a little time to talk to us.
Okay.
For the Dixon Library. I guess I'll turn this off now.